It is!
This devotional, I think, is going to be a little shorter than the other ones. And we've been talking about faith with Abraham and Sarah. And what I really want to bring out is God's mercy with our faith. Do you remember when the Lord Jesus went to heal a little boy? And the little boy's father fell down at Christ's feet. And he said something amazing. He said, "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief." He believed, but he knew he needed to believe more. And that's what's amazing about our relationship with God, right? God tells us to have faith. He wants us to have faith. And yet he knows that sometimes we need help with our faith. And so God works with us, and he changes us. And so I want us to see this in the life of Abraham and Sarah. So check this out. We touched before on Genesis chapter 15, right? Where Abraham says, "I don't have a child. What's going to happen?" And God says, "I'll give you a child," and Abraham believes, right? In the same chapter, God makes a covenant with Abraham. So let's talk a little Hebrew here. I don't know if anybody knows. I'll ask you and see if you do. Does anybody know what the Hebrew word is for covenant? If you do, that's impressive. So the Hebrew word for covenant is barit. Now, what's funny about that word is that it always goes with another word. So if you were going to say, "I'm going to make a covenant," you'd say, karati barit. Now, that would be more like, "I made a covenant." But what's funny about that, that's how we translate it in English. But if you really wanted to look at what the Hebrew means, karat, which is the word that I said before, barit. So karat, barit. Karat means to cut. Isn't that kind of funny? So in Hebrew, to say, "I made a covenant," you actually say, "I cut a covenant." Because what happens when you make a covenant, and you can read through it in Genesis 15, is that you used to, back in Bible times, you would cut animals in half. Right? So that's why you get the cutting a covenant. You cut animals in half, and then you'd actually walk through the two halves. So Abraham is told by God in Genesis 15 to cut these animals, right? So he cuts these animals in half, and he lays them up against each other. And what happens is fascinating. You might wonder, what's the whole idea behind this? Well, let's just read through the verses, and then I'll explain it to you. It says in verse 10, Genesis 15, verse 10, let's start at verse 9. Genesis 15, verse 9 says, "And he," that's God, "said unto him," that's Abraham, "Take me a heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took unto him all these, and divided them in the midst." So he cuts them in half, lays each piece one against another, but the birds divided he not. You might wonder, why does he do this? What's the point? And the whole idea was, when you made a covenant, you would take these animals and you would cut them in half to say, if I don't fulfill this covenant, right? A covenant's like a promise. If I don't do my part of the promise, what I just did to these animals is what's going to happen to me, right? They represent me. So basically, I'm going to be cut in half if I don't fulfill this promise. It was a big deal, to make a covenant. So Abraham does that. And so people would walk through the two halves to show how these halves, these animals, represented them, right? And what would happen to them if they didn't fulfill the covenant. So you'd cut the animals in half, you'd lay them on the ground, and then you'd walk through them to say, this is what is going to happen to me if I don't fulfill the covenant. Now, here's what's amazing. Do you know what happens after that? God puts Abraham to sleep. Now, I don't know about you, but any of you who have been put to sleep before, like maybe you've had your wisdom teeth taken out, or you've had some kind of surgery. I don't know about you, but it is ridiculously hard to do anything when you're like that, right? You just lay there, and you're asleep. You can't move, you can't walk. There is no way that Abraham was going to walk through those halves, right? He couldn't walk through the animals when he was put to sleep. But listen to what happens. It says, "And it came to pass," this is verse 17, "when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp passed between those pieces." Those represented God. Do you see what's happening in this covenant? Abraham is put to sleep, and God makes it so that Abraham can't walk through the pieces. Abraham can't say, if I don't fulfill my part of the covenant, this should happen to me. God makes it so that he can't say that. And so God himself then goes through the pieces. So there were two people in this covenant. There was Abraham and there was God. God doesn't let Abraham walk through the pieces, and God does. What's the point? Well, think about this. God made a covenant with the Israelites at Mount Sinai, right? That was the law. Moses had the law written on the Ten Commandments. Who broke the covenant? God or the people? I mean, really, the people broke the covenant the first day that it was made. Moses sees them worshiping the golden calf, and he throws the tablets on the ground, literally breaking them, showing, you all just totally broke the covenant on the first day it existed. The children of Israel broke the covenant. They were the first ones. And so what's amazing about this covenant with Abraham is God specifically says to Abraham, you're not going to walk through these pieces because I am making this covenant with you. And you can't mess it up. Isn't that astonishing? Right? Like he says, this covenant is being made with you for an everlasting covenant that's never going to go away because I can't break it because I'm God. Right? God doesn't lie. God doesn't break covenants. Humans do. So God doesn't let Abraham walk through the pieces. That's how God works with us. He knows that our faith needs help. And so he works with us and he changes us. And so throughout Abraham's life, God is shaping him and God is teaching him. And Abraham struggles with the same issues, the same problems sometimes. And yet his faith becomes astonishing to the point of becoming the father of the faithful. And so even to show, how this change has happened in him, right? God changes his name. So in Genesis 17, God says, you know what? You're gonna have a different name. Your name is not going to be Honorable Father, but it's going to be Father of a nation, Father of a multitude, because I've made this covenant with you and it's going to happen. And you might not think, a name is real significant now. But back then, names meant things, right? In Hebrew, names are like sentences. It'd be like if your name was, I'm going to be strong, or I'm going to be a faithful Christadelphian, or something like that. Like, names were not just, oh, I think this is pretty, so I'm going to name my kid this. A name was, this is who I want my kid to be. So, I'm going to be a faithful Christadelphian, that'd be a good name. But, so back then, Hebrew names, they were a full sentence. So when you were sitting at a table with Abraham, you'd say, hey, Honorable Father, could you pass the soup, please? Right, because that was what Abram meant, Honorable Father. But now that his name's changed, you'd have to say, hey, Father of many nations, could you pass that, please? And God was essentially saying, I am completely changing who you are. You're not just a father. You're going to be a father of many nations. We don't have to do it by ourselves. Abraham didn't have to sit there and say, I believe what God has said, so I'm going to change my name. I believe that God's going to give me a seed and that he's going to give me children, so I'm going to change my name to Father of many nations so that I remember. No, Abraham didn't have to do that. God changed his name, and that's the point. We've been looking at faith and how we have to have faith, and that's true. But what's beautiful is that it's not just us alone. Or it's not just us with our friends, right? It wasn't just Abraham and Sarah, but it's Abraham and Sarah with God. And so God works with our weakness. He works with our struggle. and he'll change us permanently, right? I mean, where in the New Testament is Abraham ever called Abram, right? That was a permanent, for real change. So God will change us. God will work with us. He just says, believe what I have said, even though it seems impossible, and believe it to the end of your life, and I'll do the rest.